to share with you how I plan to teach history to my second grader next year. And this would be relevant for all of elementary because my plan is to use picture books chronologically, month by month, to focus on a different time period of American history and lead him through that story of American history with picture books. And of course, we can add in virtual tours, field trips, activities off Pinterest if we want to. We could tie it in with writing. We could connect it with science. But the basic thing is just that we are going to read books and enjoy them and snuggle and see if it, inspires us to go further with those optional activities. But before I share with you our plan of how we're going to do our month-by-month chunks chronologically through American history with picture books, I want to share with you how our journey of history has gone so far, from kindergarten first and now to second. So how did I teach history in kindergarten? Well, traditionally, and how I taught it is that you use the holidays mainly to teach American history. But you also will have units like, for example, the beginning of the year, citizenship, about your home and your community, who your president is, what's your address, phone number, things of that nature, kind of that me on the map, starting with the big picture of the continents and then moving all the way into your home and where you live in your community. And then you would also do a unit on community workers, police officers, firefighters, doctors, nurses, and other jobs and important roles in our community. Then you would move into talking about American history using holidays like Thanksgiving, Native Americans, pilgrims, and the story behind our American history. Then you would talk about life then and now, before or after that point. How has life changed? What are some inventions or things that have changed with communication, transportation, living and electricity, things of that nature. How has life changed from then and now? You would use holidays like Martin Luther King Jr. Day to pre-expose them to important key figures and events in our history. You would also use holidays like President's Day for that same purpose, as well as St. Patrick's Day and St. Valentine's Day. And so as you can see, they're getting a pretty good pre-exposure to some American history concepts. You also would want to tie in a unit or things like American symbols, the Liberty Bell, the bald eagle, our flag, and other key symbols that point the child to know the founding of our country in freedom, and those would connect them to some key figures and stories surrounding those American symbols. Then moving into first grade, I didn't think that I was ready to go into a chronological, kind of classical conversations approach where you move through history every 3 to 4 years using a textbook. And while I may do that one day, not using classical conversations textbooks, because I don't quite like the way they teach it, but I do like mystery of history. It's going to give you that same ability to chronologically loop through history every 3 years. But we weren't ready for that. So for first grade, I wanted to give him a chance to get the whole scope of history on a very, very simple base level. So we did a journey through the continents, which I have posted for free on my Teachers Pay Teachers, and have a video on that as well, those unit study year-long plans. And basically, there was a lot to it, but the main portion of it that gave us that history was that at each stop on a continent, we would focus on that kind of iconic history connection. So if we're in Africa, we're going to learn about, Egypt and the pyramids and connect that to Bible. If you're in Europe, you're going to talk about monarchy, kings, queens, and knights, and you're going to talk about Vikings and things of that nature. If you're in Europe, you can just expose them to the concept of empires, empresses, and emperors, and the concept of a dynasty and things of that nature. And of course, in North America, the basics of our foundings. So as you can see, it was giving him a little bit of world history in a very light sense, just with those kind of key, like you should know this, you know, and then American history as well. And so that made me feel like he got that overall dose quickly in a very, very light and gentle way. And now I want to, this year, really go even deeper in our American history, but still gently with picture books. So how I plan to do that is to break it up into the following time periods, not for the purpose, again, of memorizing or anything like that. I would definitely like him to own that information to begin to be able to tell the story of our country on a simple level. You know, this isn't about, you know, dates per se or anything like that. All right, what you see here, the sea of books, is actually month by month what books I will be picking from to cover our history this year. So what I have is, starting with August, what picture books, what chapter book for ongoing reading, and what books he could read. So you can see for August I don't have any right there, so he'll be probably reading some fiction from this pile, and so on and so forth. And so that's how I organized it for each month. And what I have in mind is to have at least 1 to 4 picture books on each topic, 1 chapter book on each topic for that month, and then whatever I have available for him. I have lots and lots of books, so if I don't have something specific on that topic, then he would just pick off my shelf some of the books or some ideas I have for him for fiction. Next year, the Maple Ridge series he needs to finish, and then the Billy and Blaze collection I think would be a good text for him this year. For August, we're going to do Native Americans. I just have 2 books on that topic right now. I'm going to keep it really light and focus on core subjects. And our chapter book, The Courage of Cyril Noble. Then for September, we're going to focus on explorers. I may or may not use this book. It's in depth on Christopher Columbus, so if he's not that interested, then on Christopher Columbus Day, October 8th, we'll just read about him. So I'll actually be probably, you know, starting this in August and going into September a little bit, and then starting this in September and going till October 8th, which is Christopher Columbus Day. We might first touch on, before Christopher Columbus Day, who Amerigo Vespucci was, and talk about some other explorers in history as well, in the past and present. Then for October, before, you know, if we're going in order, we would next talk about the Jamestown colony before getting into Thanksgiving story. That was a colony that did not stay, so that's why they weren't as famous as the Plymouth colony, the Mayflower Pilgrims. So I really only have 1 book that kind of touches on Pocahontas and John Smith, who were, you know, the Jamestown figures, among others. So it'll be a light month. You know, in October I could focus more on science that way, and seasons and fall and things of that nature. And then our chapter book is A Line to Gardas, also set in Jamestown time and setting and characters. He could read this true story of Pocahontas if he wants to. Right, so November, on Thanksgiving week or day, we'll read this version of the Thanksgiving story and some other options I have for him to read or myself. Again, I have these scholastic books, so if you were trying to actually look at what books I have and buy some of them, I would say that, you know, if you have older kids and they're like the type who really like to go in depth, these scholastic ones on the topic are great. But if you have some younger kids and you're limited on what you can buy, then I would just look for books on the topic of the Mayflower and the Thanksgiving story and stick with these kind of basic picture books. These are really neat. Samuel Eaton's Day, Pilgrim Children during this time period, Sarah Morton's Day, if you have a girl especially. And then this is like an alternate Thanksgiving story about, you know, other immigrants that came, not just the Mayflower Pilgrims. Our November chapter book would be Squanto, Friend of Pilgrims. And then here we are, December. It's going to be super light. So it'll be, you know, after the Mayflower Pilgrims came, then we went into colonial times, establishing the 13 colonies. So I have this A to Z book that kind of gives a fun overview. And then I have another one of those scholastic books. And otherwise, it'll be Christmas books and Advent, and, you know, focused on traditions and Christ. And then he could read George Washington, because I have a lot of those types of presidents and George Washington books, so I'm kind of going to spread them out. And of course, George Washington was very much involved in the colonial times as they prepared for the Revolutionary War, and he was a very important figure in general that led the Revolutionary War. So that will help lead us into January. And so, Revolutionary War. Again, I have this kind of thicker scholastic book on the topic, or some picture books, you know, understanding who were the Minutemen. It's going to be Paul Revere's Ride, talking about how they began to, you know, break away from England and wanted to have a flag. And, you know, fun stories that review the American symbols about the Liberty Bell and how the Liberty Bell was involved during the Revolutionary War time period. And it's just a fun story. Really, my son enjoyed those stories in kindergarten. And I like when I can use books more than 1 year and kind of cycle them back through in various years. All right, so now we are in February. So now we're getting into when, you know, we won the war and we are in the Federalist period where you're beginning to move into having presidents and actually being a country. And so talking about things like the Constitution and what it means to be a president and who are some of our presidents. These are really fun books. This is Peter W. Barnes and Cheryl Shaw Barnes. In second grade for my son, and really any grade at elementary, it's good to kind of get a rough idea also about how our government works a little bit. So I thought that was a good book. And talking about the White House is a review piece from kindergarten if you talk about American symbols. And then Courthouse Mouse, so understanding the branches a little tiny bit is good. Again, you know, this is the thicker scholastic book on the topic. We may or may not use it this year, but it's a good option. And then for our chapter book, I think we're going to start the Burgess Bird book. As I move into the second semester each year, I always start feeling like that tug toward nature when it comes to science. You know, as you get into the spring, thinking of animals and plants, that tends to be when I start addressing it. So I'm going to get a little early start. I was going to start in January because that's like one of your first National Bird Days, but I kind of did. This one I didn't mention for January is the chapter book I want to do, and it is combining history and kind of nature with this little boy with a bird I think he finds, and it's set during colonial times and I think even the Revolutionary War possibly. So that's kind of a nice launch into now, you know, taking a chapter book that's purely like life science and, you know, just birds and stories. So it's nice to take a little break. And I forgot to mention I did that as well over here in September. This chapter book is Ellie's Log. I think it's kind of a popular one-ish, Exploring the Forest Where the Great Tree Fell. So it's like taking a break in the sense that that month's chapter book, you know, even though we'll still do the picture books, the chapter book will be on science and nature. So, you know, and hopefully we'll tie in more nature study elsewhere, but at least we'll get a couple books in this year that are kind of nature focused. And so then we would move into January, February, March. So March, we're marching west, okay? So the 13 colonies have been established and we're beginning to branch out and signed the Louisiana Purchase, and Lewis and Clark, you know, explored the land and people started moving west. And so we aren't calling them pilgrims, and then we called them colonists, and now we're calling them pioneers. And so I have this book. I can read this in 1 or 2 sittings, definitely one if you want to. And it gives a good overview. It even starts with Lewis and Clark and talking about how they began to expand westward. And then if you want to go in more depth, the Pioneer Sample is one of those books you can use again and again, and you can just read select parts of it, or you could do a whole unit study with it if you wanted. And it just talks about life in the pioneers' days. It gives like recipes and activities, and it's just really nice short stories that you can select from. This is another book that has a lot of different history stories in it by William J. Bennett. He has a lot of other books that I'm not going to show right now that I have that are pretty good. Some of the things are a little strange or different in some of his books, but overall I like them, I guess. And I think that I put this one in this pile because it does have a succinct story about Lewis and Clark. It also has some stories of other figures that would have fitted earlier in the year. So if I had wanted to, I could have, you know, referenced this book at other points as well for some stories. And then our chapter book for westward expansion and Lewis and Clark is The Adventures of Munford. Munford means Lewis and Clark. And by the way, almost all of these books have been given to me or found at free tables or thrifted or eBay. Like this one I got from, I don't know, like a homeschool like free table day that they had. This, I didn't have to buy that book either. Farmer Boy. Actually, like
not very many of these books I've had to buy. I've been very blessed. A retired teacher years ago gave me a lot of the scholastic ones and various other ones that I've just collected from, you know, my days of being a teacher. So definitely don't feel like you need to buy all these books, but just having one or two or maybe one per week. There's an average of 4 weeks per month. So like one per week, like for like a history day where you read like a fun picture book on the topic. And from there you can watch little videos on YouTube or just keep it light. So now we're moving into how our country is just growing and expanding. The war's over and people are starting to settle in, and we're going into the time of the Industrial Revolution, of course. When you're reading this book, The Story of Inventions, it's going to talk about inventions that happened way before this time period and also after. So kind of going forward and backward in history. And I really thought this was a fun book. It has lots of great pictures and it's in order, and you can pick and choose or just read through the whole book on different inventions. Here's the table of contents in case you're interested. And then it's nice to have a little bit of a diverse history. So here's some other inventors other than the typical. Thomas Edison, I just happen to have a picture book I got free. Another free one. Almost all of these, honestly. I've just been collecting books for way too long. Death of the Iron Horse, I thought that would tie in. It ties in Native Americans and trains, which is a big part of Industrial Revolution. Airplanes with inventions. And interestingly, this is not about the Wright brothers. The cover would immediately make you think that. It's actually a different figure, so that kind of threw me off for a second. He has briefly touched on the Wright brothers, but I think maybe that I will have to touch on that. And then another cool train book. This is a really cool book. Talks about the Transcontinental Railroad and just does it in a really creative and beautiful way with the pictures, and even using some onomatopoeia with the sounds, and so it's pretty neat. So then for our, I guess this kind of is like a chapter book, so I actually didn't put a chapter book this month, I think, which is good because if I do end up reading all these books, we'll have plenty to read. And then for his reading, I forgot to show you for the last several months. January, I have some on, you know, the president and just the story of our American flag for him to read. George Washington's mother and Thomas Jefferson during February with the presidents. And then during westward expansion with Lewis and Clark that month, talking about the wagon train, people expanding, and Lewis and Clark for him. So for this month, for his reading, he could read Prairie School, which is a really, I think, popular one I've seen before that people have suggested. I did actually buy that one. The Trail of Tears and Striking It Rich. So, you know, how people went west, obviously, a lot of them for various reasons, but one of those reasons was because they were trying to find gold. And then our last month of school, May, we're going to be talking about freedom. We're going to be talking about, you know, how slavery was abolished, you know, that journey to it with what is the Underground Railroad and the Drinking Gourd, and just fun picture books that talk about that and the importance of how God created us all equal, and what Abraham Lincoln's role was that with the Emancipation Proclamation, and how even though slavery ended, equality was still a problem for like a whole century until key figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and the Freedom Riders came along and began to bring equality. And in between the emancipation of slavery and equality for all people, I might read this book about Susan B. Anthony and talk about how women didn't always have the same rights as men. I'm definitely anti-feminist movement in the sense of what it has become, but it is obviously a wonderful thing that we can vote and women have freedoms that we have today. And the way this book presents it, from the quick scan I did prior to this video, I think gives it that spin rather than the ugly side of what feminism can be. And then the chapter book for that month, Runaway Home by Scholastic, or, you know, Patricia McKissick, I think that's how you say it. And then if he wants to, again, he'll probably be reading books off the shelf of his choice or some of those fiction books series I showed you. But we can mix in some of these historical books I've matched up. And this one is kind of a good one for the end of the year because it's summarizing basically what we talked about all year. Statue of Liberty, so it even touches on American symbols, which like I mentioned earlier in the video, is an important way to introduce history to kindergartners and first graders, which I did not mention. Actually, kindergarten and first grade are very parallel in the way they were taught when I was teaching. Yeah, that's August through May. And I want to encourage you that it is about customizing your own journey. So if you find some really cool books on any one of these topics that you want to share in the comments with me, that would be super cool, and it would make my day also to know that you are joining me on this journey. And I hope it is helpful to someone and frees you to just read books with your kids and learn about history in a fun way. And thank you so much for sticking around and watching.